You're listening to the Final Say Radio Show, a Rappaport Media production, with your host Brett Rappaport and co-host John Rappaport.
Well, John, it's my pleasure to have back on the program our good friend Congressman Phil Roe from the great state of Tennessee. Congressman, it's great to have you on board today, and boy, do we have a lot to talk about. I know you have a lot on your mind, and why don't we start off with the real easy part, and that's something that you've been working on with this, and you've had a press release, in fact, today on it as well. But regarding the health care for veterans and ensuring that, one, the systems make sense that they have to maneuver through, and that they're getting the care that we've promised to them.
Well, Brett and John, thanks for having me on. I start out by saying I just left our local high school up here, which is at a memorial event. They put a veterans memorial at the high school, and they've had 38 young men from that high school that have died in wars in this country. And one of the you heard you talking about, just as I came on, one of the most remarkable stories I've ever heard in my life. One young man managed to get in the Army from Science Hill High School in Johnson City, Tennessee in World War II when he was 13 years old. He went in and parachuted in with the 101st Airborne Division, fought in the Battle of the Bulge, and was then discharged from the military, came back and finished high school, went back in the military as an officer, and sadly was killed as a major in Vietnam. That is an incredible story. I'd never heard that before. And we have this one high school here has 38 names on the wall. And when students walk in that high school, it's a big high school, 2,200 students. When they walk in, the first thing they see when those students enter the school is a memorial to their fallen classmates. Really remarkable.
That's an incredible story, and just it shows how great Americans could be. That's us at our best, that willing to sacrifice even when you're 13. You're supposed. I guess back then you were supposed to still be 18, correct, or was it 17?
Oh no, 18. And what he apparently did was he apparently got some guy who was homeless, sort of cleaned him up, walked down to the recruiter station and told these guys this was his dad, and he was 17 years old and he was going to sign him up. That's what he told them, and he got in.
Wow. Congressman, even though we may not always agree with his politics, but this one's almost worth sending a note to Tom Hanks on, because if ever there's a person who could tell a story like this that should be told, I mean, he could get it done.
It's the most remarkable thing I'd ever heard. I thought I'd heard it all till I heard that today, and it was the students were there. A lot of the one World War II veteran who graduated from high school in 1943 was there to lay a rose at the foot of this memorial for 3 of his fallen classmates that had died in World War II. You see this, and this is a phenomenal country, and I've said this on the. We'll share those feelings again. We'll go to a lot of Memorial Day events here. I'm going to 4 or 5 this weekend. And you'll just hear stories like that over and over, and it makes you proud. And a young man came up to me today, Brett and John, he said, Dr. Rowe, he said, I'm trying to get into the military academy. He said, I've run cross country this year. I'm going to Boys State. He's a great student. And you see young men like that, and young women, too, step up like that. And you know that there are great young people still in this country. It really makes me feel good to go see that memorial that high school put out there today. It was really, really, really remarkable.
No, that's great points. And I got to tell you, it's Memorial Day is just. I usually spend it at home and do a lot of reflection. Of course, I watch a lot of movies. But as you just think about things, you think about the sacrifice that for so many years in this country that men and women have made just in defense of the principles and ideals that we believe in, and that in recent years we've been working so hard to try to maintain, or in some cases get back.
Well, this is a question that I always, and I'm sure we'll get to it a little later in this segment about the IRS and some other things, but every veteran, as I am, asks themselves, did it make any difference that I served? And I left this country. I had a 6-week-old son when I went in the Army, and 12 weeks old when I left the country. I spent 13 months just south of the DMZ in Korea and ran into a buddy of mine here in Johnson City, runs a small paper. He was stationed, unbeknownst to us, we were 11 miles apart, or they never knew it while we were there. And when I was in that country, Brett, there was a military dictator. It was clawing out of war, rebuilding after leveled that. The Korean War leveled that country. In 1960, Korea had the same GDP as Afghanistan. Today, Afghanistan is the fourth poorest country in the world. Today, the Korean president spoke about 2-3 weeks ago in Congress, and I was able to hear her remarks. It's the 8th largest economy in the world, 50 million free people, and a highly educated society, and the largest Christian church in the world is in Seoul, Korea. Let me tell you, it validated me being in the military. I've told the folks today, I said, if you Korean War veterans and those of you who have served, yes, your service mattered, and the country is better off for you having done that.
That's a great point. Well, if we can get into, because I know there's a lot to cover on them, let's just call them what they are, scandals. I would like to start first with the AP and Fox. And I think this is important because in this country, of any country, we always expected the media to be the watchdog, the one organization, if you will, that would bring the information to the American people and keep our government honest. And I think that they haven't always done a very good job of it. We could all point to examples, but in this particular case, the government going after the media, to me, is about as frightening as anything can be in this nation, and I think that is something that has to be immediately addressed, and that the American people and these news media organizations deserve some answers.
You know, it's amazing. You said exactly what I did. I was stopped by a reporter just coming off the House floor this past week, and I said, you may be shocked at what I'm going to say when you look at all these scandals, but I believe to our individual freedom, the targeting of the press may be the worst thing that's happened, and the reason I say that is because it is exactly you all, whether I agree with you or not, I put on a uniform, left this country to give you the right to do it. I will defend that right. You might not like what you say and may make my blood pressure go up when you say it about me, but I will defend your right to say it, and it keeps us honest. It keeps the sun shining on us as long as the reporters don't inject their own political bias into this. As long as they just report the facts will speak for themselves, and that's exactly, Brett and John, what we have to do with all of these things. It's going to take us months, if not years, to ferret out all of what's been going on in this administration. And you don't point fingers until you have the facts. And you need to go ahead and investigate this. And I certainly think with James Rosen, I haven't dealt into that story much, but that's chilling what they have. And this is the Attorney General has signed off on. This is not some deal where, and apparently this whole outfit up there is run by the Keystone Cops. Is that nobody knows what's going on in their shop? I would like to have used that excuse in my business where, oh well, that happened, but I didn't know that I was responsible for that. Well, yes, you are. And I know what I was responsible for when I walked in an operating room. I knew it wasn't the scrub nurse. I knew it wasn't the surgical nurse. I knew it wasn't the people that cleaned the room up or the anesthesiologist. It was me, the surgeon. And that's exactly who should take responsibility now and find out what is going on. This nonsense about, oh, I don't know, with Fast and Furious, and then you go ahead with the AP story, and the guy who's in charge of the shop claims he doesn't know what's going on. Well, he can't claim this on James Rosen because he's the one that signed off on it.
Well, there's two comments that I wanted to make here. One is the fact that they targeted Rosen, of all people. He is one of the most benign, non-biased, when you listen to the type of reporting he does. The fact that they went after him, I think will have huge negative ramifications. You already see it, because that serves. It's not like they went after Sean Hannity, which agree with him or not, at least is overtly biased. But the fact that they went after Rosen, even the Huffington Post and people are screaming out, Holder's got to go. So there may be a silver lining to this madness.
Well, I think. Look, I said I don't care whether you are a Washington Post, New York Times, left-leaning paper. I mean, they don't see themselves as that, but I certainly do. That reporting needs to be protected also. And I think that for 220 years, what's kept us straight in this country is a free press. And when you can manipulate the press, intimidate the press, we won't get the information we need. And I tell you, this Rosen story, I agree with you. Look, Sean Hannity is he has a talk show, and he's not in the news business. He is not. That's not his. He's in the not in the traditional news business, I should say. He is in the news business, but he editorializes. He's not presenting a story per se. But James Rosen, that's what he does. He's a journalist that goes out and presents a story so we can make our own minds up about how we think about it. I'll tell you something else that's happening. I've been to several classified briefings on various things, not the IRS yet, but certainly Benghazi and other security things. And I'm beginning to wonder now if some of these I could learn as much on turning on Fox or CNN. And I'm wondering is if they're not telling us this is classified, you can't talk about it, so you can't talk about it. So I'm not sure I'm going to go to many more of those classified briefings where I don't learn anything, and yet I'm not allowed to speak about anything I heard, which I can hear on the public media.
Yeah, that's a great point. You mentioned classified, and to me, there has to be a very clear criteria for what would be considered to be classified and, a matter of national security. Otherwise, they could play all the political games and tricks and keep information from not just the media, but in many cases, I'm sure members of Congress aren't being informed of things that they should be aware of. And if we could look at the IRS issue, and they all sort of link together because I think there's a lot of funny business going on here. And I think the American people just aren't being told the truth or things are just being misrepresented. But the IRS is an agency, and I know because I worked in accounting for well over a decade, the IRS is the one agency that could destroy your life.
Yep.
They could literally come in and take everything you have and ruin your life, and you can't recover. Once you lose your home, once you lose your job, once you lose your business, once you have an amount that you have to pay back to the IRS with penalties and interest, and forget the taxes you may or may not have owed. Trying to answer the IRS is an impossible task. And I always look at it this way. In the United States, our criminal and justice system always says you are innocent until proven guilty. We fought a revolution against a country that was the other way around. You had to prove your innocence. And to me, the IRS is more like Britain than the United States. And I think it has to be addressed, and I would look to Congress to really take a different look at what the IRS is doing, not just for this scandal, but just the way they operate, the way they interact with the American people and the taxpayer.
Well, John, let me give you there is some good news. Because of sequestration, the IRS is closed today, so they can't hurt anybody today. That's the good news. They had to close the business for today. I think they furloughed everybody today, thank goodness. And I agree with you. For the average citizen, if you're a large company or corporation, you have the assets to fight back. If you're an individual, you're basically destroyed. And I think we've got to get to the bottom of this. We have had this sort of nonsense that's gone on in the past where we have a healthy fear and angst of the IRS anyway. And to think that they have people out there that may be targeting you because of your political beliefs for an audit, and by the way, let me tell you, this past week, you won't believe how many stories I've heard now when I was back in Washington from across the country of various businesses that think they were targeted now, and because of their beliefs, and they may be right. And the only way, I don't know whether they're right or wrong, but I think what you have to do is take very seriously. Let me give you an example. The FBI goes into Gibson Guitar in Nashville a couple of years ago with 40-something agents with vests on and pistols and all that. I'm thinking, what is your biggest danger here because they may have imported some wood? Are you worried about getting hit in the head with an F5 Gibson mandolin? Is that what the fear is? I mean, this Gestapo-type tech or a Earl Scruggs banjo, and they go storming in Governor McDonald's. There's another case down here in Tennessee with Pilot Oil. I begin to wonder, wait a minute, is something going on? And these are all, by the way, these are all conservatives. So I don't know whether there's any truth to it, but that's why you need to investigate and find out what the truth is. And it goes more. You can't tell me some low-level, lowest learner who's pled the Fifth Amendment is the brainchild, the brain trust behind all of this. I think you keep peeling this onion back till you find out where the stink comes from.
Well, we learned something in accounting in college when we were being trained, and that is if it looks like a fish and it smells like a fish, it's a fish.
I think you're right. I think, and I'll say somebody else this week who didn't have such a great week was Jay Carney. I've renamed him Baghdad Bob. Remember when Baghdad Bob was out explaining why the Baghdad was in such good shape and buildings were blowing up behind him and everything? That's kind of the way Jay Carney is with these things. He's trying to defend the indefensible, and he has made absolutely no sense whatsoever this week trying to defend all that.
Well, first off, look on the bright side. The one good thing about Baghdad Bob is, if you really think back to history, Baghdad Bob is what gave rise to Fox News, because when people realized that CNN became the targeting network for Saddam Hussein, they very quickly felt that they needed an alternative, and I truly believe that helped to give rise. But on this subject, I think that you also have to look. Once you can call an accident, twice you can maybe even call a scandal. Yep. But when you start talking 10 times, you really have to look at this as a complete crisis of confidence. And I just wanted to make the connection that you talked about your brothers in arms, and was their sacrifice, whether it was the ultimate or just as you did, time away from family, friends, and loved ones. It's not just was your sacrifice worthwhile, but what are you actually fighting for? And if I'm a veteran right now and I'm sitting in Afghanistan and I'm nurturing the wounds of one of my fellow warriors and I'm looking at these scandals, I have to ask myself not just is it worthwhile my time, but what am I actually fighting for?
Well, I guess perhaps, and I'm a Vietnam era veteran, so I was, and I lived in Clarksville, Tennessee, which is the home of the 101st Airborne Division, and I saw the Vietnam War, and I guess that's tainted how I view things. I've been to Afghanistan on 2 occasions, and I have another trip in the works over there, so those young folks will know that people like myself, veterans like myself, have not forgotten them and will not forget them, and will have their back until they all get home. And it does. There is a crisis, Brett and John, that we want to believe and trust our government. I do. I want to believe and trust my government. Look, we live in the greatest nation this earth has ever known. We have a Constitution that created the rules of which we play by. And that means that nobody is above the law. And that would be Richard Nixon, who came down because he put himself above the law, and we found that, no, he is not. And I think that was one of the great lessons of Watergate, was that no person in this country is above the law, no matter what their economic standing is. And I think right here we've had 3 people, Lois Lerner and I think Steve Miller, who was a previous acting IRS commissioner, and one of his subordinates resigned. That ain't enough. We've got to, again, investigate till we find out how high this goes, who knows, and when they knew it, because I don't believe that's it. And I don't think we will know until we have an investigation. And they called, I remember they said, we've had this investigation by Russell George, who's the IG. No, that was an audit, and that's totally different than a subpoenaed investigation where you testify under oath. That is a completely different deal. So people get confused with an IG report of an audit versus a true investigation.
Well, I'm glad you bring that up, because when you listen to these presentations, it's almost like when you ask your child if they did their homework versus when you have a conversation with their teacher. It's remarkable how you can get 2 very different answers. Is there not more power in the hands of Congress to really force these people, to subpoena them and really force them to properly testify, even if it has to be done behind closed doors, to really ascertain the truth? I mean, if on the one hand, I think Darrell Issa in particular is doing a very good job, and on the other hand, it feels like Congress is still being a little soft on this subject and letting them get away with way too much. Nobody knows anything, saw anything, or participated in any events.
I think you're going to see the Congress be very tough on this, and Darrell Issa has done a good job. He has there are limited tools that they have, and I right now am not leaning toward a special prosecutor because of who the Attorney General is, for goodness sakes, and who would be appointing the prosecutor. So I'd rather leave it in the hands of Congress, somebody that I trust, if we can shine a little light on. And I think he's going to use the subpoena power and putting you under oath. And you saw what happened when Lois Lerner went under oath. She clammed up like a clam, and I mean, she said absolutely nothing except I'm innocent. And some people think, as Trey Gowdy thought. I asked some lawyers, and again, I'm not a lawyer. I wouldn't even have an opinion on whether she gave up her Fifth Amendment rights. I don't know that, but some people think that she has when she then gave a statement and then left the room. But there are going to be other people put under oath. I can assure you of that. We will get to the bottom of it. The leadership on our side is committed. And to the Democrats' credit, some of them are saying, hey, and especially this AP story and this James Rosen, look, it doesn't matter which team is in the White House or in power. That power has to be checked, and it can't be unbridled by either Republicans or Democrats. And that's why the Founding Fathers put the checks and balances in the Constitution that they did.
Well said, and that's why we're such fans of free press in the first place, is because that is, both sides. Look, we think you're awesome, but if you were president one day, I have to tell you, I'd be happy to have the left beating up on you. Why? Because it keeps you honest. I mean, that's just at the end of the day, like you said, it keeps
you from driving off the right or the left side of the road. It keeps you in the middle of the road doing your job. And I don't buy this business of, it seems like every department head doesn't know what's going on. You got the Attorney General that claims he doesn't know what's going on. You got the acting director of the IRS. He doesn't know what's going on. And the president doesn't know what's going on. The State Department didn't know what was going on in Benghazi. I mean, well, excuse me, but who's in charge of this hen house anyway?
Well, plausible deniability doesn't work when it's coming in the form of incompetence on every single level. I mean, if you brought it up, so I'll expand on this. I listened to the president's speech yesterday at the National Defense University, and I was just taken back because it was a speech almost as if we had just gone through a completely different reality for the 4 years, and to me it was just trying to shift attention away from not only reality but the three scandals that we're discussing here. But again, when we look at President Obama or any of these heads of the agencies, when something goes wrong, nobody's accountable, and no one at the top ever seems to understand what's going on or what has occurred here. And to me, if that's the level of leadership we have, then let's just be honest about it. We don't have leadership.
Well, we don't. And remember, the Congress has oversight powers. And that's one of the things that you all just said a minute ago that we're going to have to exercise with some strength, I think, is these oversight powers that the Congress has. And I'm glad to see my Democratic friends are are a little concerned about this administration also. And again, this is going to take some time, and I'm sure, I don't know whether Mr. Green, I don't know, no one's asked him, Mr. George, the IG who did the IG audit, whether he held that information from Congress till after the election. He may not have completed his. That could have very well been what his reason was, but we need to find those things out. Why didn't that report when Darrell Issa asked for it? How come he didn't get the report then?
Congressman, do you have another few minutes?
I do.
Okay, I have one particular question that I've been dying to ask you all week long is you've been hearing a lot of rumblings coming up now from the unions of all people, the biggest backers of this administration and this health care, especially because a lot of them were getting these special waivers. I assume you've been following this. So what are your thoughts on this sort of union backlash, realizing that they thought they bought fresh fish, and as we said before, that fish, it stinks?
Well, it's interesting. I'm going to have some meetings with the unions when I get back to Washington, and as you know, being co-chair of the Doctors Caucus, I'm also chairman of the RSC, the Republican Study Committee, Health Committee, and we're in the process of doing an Obamacare rewrite. If we repeal it, you got to replace it with something. That's what my committee is charged with, and we'll have that product out by the end of July so people can see what it is. What I told the unions, Brett and John, when I first looked at this and I read that bill, I said, I cannot imagine why the unions are in supporting this thing. Let me tell you a couple of things that happened to them. they are, especially people who work for multi-employers, and I'm working on because of my chairmanship of the subcommittee on health, employment, labor, and pensions. We're dealing with multi-employer. Let's say you work as a carpenter for one shop, and then you're at the union hall, and then you get called to another shop to work on a different job for the next 6 months. You can get health insurance, and you can get your retirement benefits that way, and it's a good way to do it, and I'm actually supportive of that. And what's happened is that if you got your health benefits that way, and your employer suddenly decides that because he can't be competitive, he's going to drop after the union contract is up, we're going to drop the health insurance and let you buy your insurance on the exchange. You don't get a subsidy. In other words, you don't get the subsidy to go buy. So that's what they're looking at, and they're thinking, whoops, what if this happens to us? Let me give you a perfect example of people should be screaming out loud. It just happened last week. I went down on the House floor and managed the debate time for our debate on the health care, the overturn of the Obamacare plan. 1 hour before I get there, the state insurance commissioner, Tennessee state insurance commissioner, just happened to have an appointment in my office. She came to Washington. I said, well, tell me what you're doing so far, and I've got another appointment with her in Nashville to go over it in more detail. This is what's going to happen in Tennessee and this won't be different in states around the union. January 1, individual policies, depending on whether you're male or female or whatever, will go up in the state of Tennessee, an individual insurance policy, by 40 to 75%. If you're in the small business world, small business, 50 to 55%. And I said from mountains to Memphis, mountains in East Tennessee where I live to Memphis, how many insurance companies do we have in the state now that sell insurance across the state? 8. She says now we have 2, and there may be only 1 when the federal exchange, if it ever gets set up. She said what's happening is people are going to have higher co-pays, they're going to have higher premiums, and they're going to have less insurance coverage. They're going to have a plan that's not as good as the one they have now. And I said, let me ask this final question. What would happen if we had done nothing whatsoever, if none of this health care reform that was supposed to make more people, you keep your health insurance if you like it, and the cost was going to go down $2,500 per policy and all that stuff? I said, what would have happened if nothing happened? And she said, well, rates would have gone up probably 8 to 10%. That looks pretty good right now compared to this thing. And, oh, by the way, if you're a self-insured plan out there and you provide all the benefits self-insured, you don't buy any insurance through the exchange, you're going to have to pay a fee of $63 per person you have insured in your business. I held a field hearing in Concord, North Carolina, just outside of Charlotte about 3 weeks ago. There's a businessman there that pays 80% of all his insurance, pays every bit of anything you do that's preventative. If you have a colonoscopy or a mammogram, he pays 100% of that. Guess what? He gets a $63 per person, not per policy, but per person. It's going to cost him tens of thousands of dollars a year, of which he gets no benefit for. And I didn't have the heart to tell him, but also he's going to have to pay an exchange fee for every policy he writes. In other words, and he doesn't even use the health care exchange. So he gets nothing for it except the bill. And the unions are just now finding out, and you're going to see more of the roofers, the restaurant workers union, and I hope to meet with them when I get back and see how we can rectify that. They shouldn't be treated differently.
No, absolutely. One other thing that came up, I think it was last week or the week before, but when people were looking at the health care bill, a lot of businesses are facing the option of either providing health care or paying the fine. I think it's $2,000. And so they're saying, well, if we're going to pay the fine, then we should try to come up with an alternative. So they're looking at some plans that are being created, which evidently would provide you some things, but it wouldn't provide you things such as major medical, or in one case there was a plan that wouldn't provide prenatal care. And so 2 things I want to say is, one is I'm shocked that we are now at a point where a health care plan could potentially not cover prenatal care. However, it's going to force Americans to pay for things they don't believe in, such as abortions or birth control and things of that nature. Then the other thing is, how are we going from a system where people could just get what they could afford and choose for themselves what they felt was appropriate for they and their families, to a system where they can go to their doctor, which you should be able to pay for anyway, but won't be able to afford to go to the hospital because they won't have that coverage, nor can most people afford to pay for that anyway. It seems like we flipped the system upside down, and it's not working at all.
Well, what happened was you had a bunch of bureaucrats. I spent 31 years out here running a business and seeing patients and taking care of them. And we did need health care reform, and I think there's enough money in the system to be able to provide health care for all of our people. And we need to get back to a system of which we're going to see the plan that I'm helping write right now. You're going to see one that does exactly what you said. You don't need to insure every single hiccup, every oil change your car has. That's not what you do. You pay for those out of your pocket, and you make sure you insure yourself for when someone runs into you with an uninsured motorist, you can get taken care of. Or if you have unfortunate enough to get something like cancer, you can get treated. Those things that we need to have you treated for. And we made a political statement with the health care bill where we had to be sure we had all the left in there screaming you had to provide an $8 birth control. I mean, you can go down and buy them all day long for 2 lattes, the price of 2 lattes at Starbucks. So there wasn't any reason to put that kind of care in and then have an employer be able to only afford something that doesn't really cover you for what you really want to be covered for is the very big expense of going to the hospital. You're absolutely spot on right.
Well, I just remember when I had a business and I had several people working for me and we had health insurance. Back then, this goes back quite a few years, but suppose it was $200 or $300, and then it started going from it would go from $300 per person. The next year it's $400, then it's $500, then it's $700, and it just started growing at a scale that was astronomical. Yes. But each step, the plan would actually offer a little less than it did the year before. Like your copay can go up, plus you're paying more. And the next thing you know, you're at a point where we already have these extreme copays and extreme and reductions in what you're getting for a lot more money. And to me, a lot of the doctors I know are making far less money than they were, or even just closing up their practices because it's not working for them anymore. And so I'm just wondering, where did all this money go? Like, how is the system that has that much money just not able to sustain itself anyway? Something's really wrong.
It's maddening to me to see how much money we put into the bureaucracy of medicine. Now, we've created this incredible bureaucracy that doesn't provide any value to anybody. Exchanges set up at the tune of billions of dollars. These healthcare exchanges. We have insurance companies that have huge bureaucracies, and guess what? It doesn't provide any care for patients, I see. They pay all this money for this amazing medical bureaucracy. I'll call them in hospitals clipboard carriers because you got to have somebody check everything the doctor does and document everything you do to make sure that you didn't do something wrong so that Medicare doesn't cuff you and haul you out. And how does that help the patient? It doesn't. And we've got to get some sanity back into our healthcare system, or no one's going to be able to afford it at all. You ask a question, and at the very beginning that I want to talk about just a second,
sure,
which is the electronic health record. You were talking about the VA. Just so
yes,
our listeners understand, when our troops are when I was in the Army, I had a manila folder and a piece of paper. That was my health record. And that's what most of us guys did and gals for years. We just had that. Well, we started gathering. Medicine became much more sophisticated, gathering more and more data. And a lot of our Vietnam era veterans, because of Agent Orange and other things, people would go back 30 and 40 years to try to find these records and put this all together by a piece of paper. With today's technology, what we want is we want a soldier who's recruited, this young man I talked to up here today at Science Hill High School, to have a virtual lifetime electronic health record. So when that soldier goes in, they can walk out at 20 years or 30 years in the military with a thumb drive and have everything that you need on it. Okay, what are we doing today? Well, the Department of Defense has one electronic health record, and the VA has another, and they can't talk to each other. So you can't go on the VA system, and when a guy gets separated from the military, with, let's say, a lot of injuries on the battlefield, things that are going to be needed taken care of, it is a very cumbersome system, and it slows down the transfer of information, and sometimes you don't get the information you need. So we said, okay, let's put you guys in a room, and this is 4 years ago. Over the years, the VA and the federal government, you the taxpayer, spent billions of dollars. Most recently, we spent, and I'm going to go back, I started thinking, I woke up this morning at 5 o'clock in the morning thinking about this to tell you what's on your mind. But I'm thinking we just spent $1 billion. That's $1,000 million so those two electronic health records could work so that veterans could get better care. And they couldn't do it, and so both sides just said, well, we can't do it. Well, excuse me, but you can't spend $1 billion on something that needs to be done. So I said, why don't we do this? Why don't we see if the private sector can come up with a solution? Since you've tried it internally and it didn't work, and I'm not pointing fingers at Secretary Hagel or Secretary Shinseki. I mean, they're running their shops as they are. I'm just saying, why don't you call on the private sector, and let's give an award to the private sector. If you set the criteria, you and Department of Defense and VA, tell me what you want in an electronic health record, so there will be a single record that a soldier has from the day they take the oath of swear to uphold the Constitution. And that's what we're doing. And that was the idea of the bill. And I don't know whether it'll go anywhere, whether we can get it done. But guys, we just spent $1 billion for and got absolutely nothing for it. $346 million last year. Got nothing, a goose egg.
That sounds about right. I mean, well, we joke. I mean, we don't necessarily joke about it, but we discuss this often on the show. When we go back a couple of years ago, when they were trying to find that last $1.2 billion to cut in that grand deal to keep the government running, and I'm thinking to myself, there's probably a million places in our government to go find $1 billion we can cut.
You could probably find it in the couch up there at the cloakroom in the house side. I mean, there's probably that much there. When you look, it's just spent in this one department $1 billion, and we said end of February, well, it won't work. We just failed.
Yeah, well,
that's astonishing to me.
It is, and when I hear from a politician or from an agency head or from Jay Carney or anyone else telling me that we just can't cut spending, it's just not believable. It's not credible, and it's just, stop being lazy is what I'd have to say to them, and get to work and find something that we could legitimately make more efficient or just get rid of altogether, because we know we could all do that.
The government is, I can't tell you, I had no idea 4.5 years ago. I haven't been there very long. But the VA had a $140 billion budget. We had a $200 million budget here in Johnson City where I was mayor. I could tell you where every nickel went. I knew exactly how much a police officer got paid, one of my school teachers, firefighter, whatever. I got up there. It's taken me 4 years to figure out how much $140 billion is. 3.6 or 7 trillion. Nobody knows how much money that is. It's a mind-boggling amount of money. And I'm finding out things that the VA does, like this $1 billion that we simply lost. Well, think about that. That's less than 1% of the VA's budget. It's like losing a penny out of a dollar. You don't even know it's gone. It's that big. In this government, I think how you get it under control is that you refuse to let it grow any faster. And that's what we've done on discretionary spending. We're at this budget, we're talking about going through the appropriations process. We'll be back down at 2008 levels on discretionary spending. But you also know that getting the government under control is going to require mandatory spending to be reined in, which is mandatory spending is Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security, food stamps, interest on the debt, those things.
Well, that's good to hear. Well, Congressman, I really do, John and I appreciate the time that you spent with us today and discussing all these very important issues. If I could just throw out one topic for the next time we speak. I know it's a little bit of past history, but I think it's very important for the members of Congress to look at again, and that is the START Treaty and some of the if you call the reset with Russia. I think that this administration hasn't done it well. First of all, I think they made a failing by introducing that to begin with, and of course the Senate approving that treaty was a mistake. And I think that in today's time, with all that's going on around the world, the if anything is a national security issue, that it's how we look at the threats around the world. And I think we need to be the most ready to go to war, most advanced, with the best equipment, the best trained military in the world, or we will lose our status. And I don't think that treaty helped us at all. But so just something I wanted to throw out there.
Well, thanks. And you know, guys who has stepped up is Poland. They've stepped up. Of the NATO countries, Poland has stepped up and spent the money on their military to modernize it. They're going to put $3 billion in the next number of years to buy new equipment and everything. And my hat's off to the Poles. They've done their fair share.
No, and we should be treating them as a better ally and having their back, if you will.
Well, you guys, thanks for having me on. I've really enjoyed this, and you all have a terrific Memorial Day.
You too. Congressman, we thank you for the great work that you do, and you have a wonderful weekend, and happy Memorial Day.
Thank you.
Take care.
That's why we have to get rid of. That's why we have to clean house, Brett. We need to get rid of some of the guys who've been around too long and haven't accomplished enough. And we need to have, folks like this. Listen, Congressman Roe has already served his country in two of the most important ways. He served as a soldier, and he served as a lifesaver and a caregiver as a physician. And now he's fighting the good fight on Capitol Hill, so we're always happy to support him.